Good morning. All right, I want to go ahead and show you on a map where our story is going to be, the setting of our story, where it's taking place. And it's a three-part story. It's called When the War is Over. There's going to be some words in here that are kind of hard to pronounce, names especially, because they come from Europe. So I want to show you on this map, and I can't make this map any larger, but it'll kind of give you an idea as to where this is taking place. So of course here's America, Canada, that's North America, South America. Here's Africa, okay, and this area right in here is Europe. This is the continent of Europe. Over here is Asia. So this is Europe. Now it's hard to see, but right here is a little country called Romania. Okay, Bulgaria, Ukraine. Okay, and there's little tiny ones in here. I can't even see the names of them that are in here, but so the setting of the story takes place right in this area. Okay, and here, this is Germany, so it has to do with Germany. All right, so let us then move on to our words that we're going to run into today. The headmaster was in charge of all the students in the school. Headmaster would be someone in charge of a school. Nowadays, if you go to public school, you might call them the principal or the superintendent. Well, back in the day, they were called the headmaster. Usually that was a private school of some sort, like for all boys or all girls. The nanny cared for the children by washing their clothes and cooking their meals. A nanny is someone who cares for children, someone who's hired and is paid money to care for children. They're not her own. The pots and pans made a loud clamor in the kitchen. What do you think clamor means? A loud noise. I've tried to be very quiet before, not to wake my children to start cooking breakfast, and I go in there and I move one pan and they all fall and I make a loud clamor. What about the terrorists were hijacking the airplane? Hijacking means taking over with force or violence. All right, so we have that out of the way. Let's go ahead and look in our book. Like I said, this is a three-part story. So let's go ahead and look at the first part of this story, which is going to be on page 198 in your book, your reader book. Now, the first part of this story is called The Little War of Wheels, 1937. Now, I'm going to read just right above that. There's a little tiny section right underneath When the War is Over. It says, Zoli Galambos, a young Hungarian, has been thrown out of his home for choosing to serve God. He arrives in the town where he once went to school to become the head of an orphanage. All right, so this, I believe this is actually a true story. So let's go ahead and look at page 198. Now, these are a couple of things I want you to think of while I'm reading this section to you. So what are the boys like who live at this orphanage? And what does Zoli think of the boys' daily activities? Now, Zoli is a nickname for Zoltan, or Zoltan. Zoltan is his real name. They call him Zoli. And his last name looks like Galambos, but it's actually pronounced Galambosh, like it's an SH at the end. Okay? All right. So I want you to be thinking of those things about the daily activities and how these boys are at the orphanage. Okay, as I read. So Mrs. Toth gazed at me through the screen door of the orphanage. Yes? Mrs. Toth, I'm Zoltan Galambos. Zoltan, I didn't know you. How you've changed. Come in, please. Bring in your things. She swung open the door. My husband will be so happy to see you here already. I set my books down by the threshold. I stepped inside the building that still smelled of fresh-cut lumber. Some of the windowsills were planed smooth, but were yet unvarnished. The whole place was airy and clean. I set down my parcel of books. My baggage is all in. She tilted her head. Oh, well, come along and let me find my husband. He has 1,000 things lined up for you. Yes, I said. Zoltan! The booming voice caught me just as a big hand closed over mine. Mr. Toth shook my hand vigorously. Mrs. Toth said, let's show him to his quarters first. She leaned sideways toward me. Once he gets to talking about the orphanage, you'll never get settled. Sure, said Toth. Where are your things? I'll help you carry them up. I've only some books in the hall, I said. We went into Kamarum, and Mrs. Toth brought me a brand new suit. I asked her whom I could pay back when I got the money, but she only waved her hand at me. The Lord provided, she said. When the boys came from school that day, they had a new headmaster, all turned out in neat suit pants and a clean shirt. 30 boys, some as tall as I, rushed past me toward upstairs. They threw down their schoolbooks by the stairs, yelling to each other and banging into each other. They're all yours, said Toth. The kitchen vibrated with their shouts. 2 women hurried to put down kettles on the table and lay out trays of bread. The boys plunged the dippers into the kettles and sloshed the stew into their bowls. The bread disappeared like snow in the April sun. For a while the shouting died into the slurping and jostling, and then it swelled again. The boys skidded back their benches, the spoons clanged into empty bowls, and a few rattled onto the floor. The boys left in groups, 2s and 3s and 4s, and thundered up the stairs. I could hear them overhead, running and shouting. The women began to take up the bowls and the glasses. I stood in the doorway, still expecting to find a reason for what had just gone on. "Excuse me." The women looked up. "I'm Zoltan Galombosh. I think I'm to be in charge here." "Hello," said the older woman. "Everyone calls me Kis Nini, the nanny. This is Greta." "Let me help you," I said. Kis Nini nodded once and handed me a cloth. Is it always so noisy?" I asked. "Yes," said Greta. "They run wild like pigs." From the window I could see the boys playing soccer again, and some of the smaller ones wrestling on the sidelines. "You are young," said Kisnini. That may come in handy," I said. In the morning, before light, I heard tables being moved in the kitchen. I dressed quickly and went down. "You're here early," I said. Kisnini yawned and patted her mouth. She stood beside a lantern hanging on the wall. It still swung a little, and the shadows wavered back and forth around her. "Yes," she said, "but much is to be done. What can I do to help?" I tucked in my shirt and rolled up the sleeves. "You could make sandwiches," she said. "The stuff is there." She pointed to a work table by the sink and wrapped each one in a paper. "Here, I'll show you." The first lot began to come in the windows after perhaps the 15th sandwich. Upstairs no one had begun to stir. "I'll call the boys," said Kisnini, "or do you want to?" I went upstairs and down the hall, throwing doors open as I went, and bellowing, "Up, boys, the day's got a jump on you. Let's go." "Who are you?" The voice came from the dim lower bunk in the last room. "The new headmaster." The boy rolled out and stood up. "Any boy knocked down in 15 minutes is out of his breakfast." Toth arrived amid the charge for the tables. Above the clamor of breakfast, he banged the sink with a metal ladle. All heads turned his way. "Good morning, fellows." "Good morning." Their response was jumbled and feeble. "This is Zoltan Galombosh. He has come to be the headmaster here." 30 pairs of eyes looked me over. He laughed his hearty laugh, too big for the small hour, I thought. "Don't think you can slip anything by him, boys. He's an old hand at this." In a while the racket rose to its old level. "I've been walking them to the school, but I expect you know where it is, yes?" said Toth to me. I nodded and surveyed the company I would have. The walk was not long, but I could see the wisdom of having a sheepdog herd the sheep toward the gymnasium. The older boys made a sport of hijacking the younger ones for their sandwiches, and the younger ones had to be prodded to keep going toward their own school. Shirt tails hung out from their waistbands at every angle, and not one head of hair looked sufficiently combed. But the shoes, I noticed, were all shined. "Mr. Galambos." I looked at the boy beside me. "Hello. You don't remember me, but I used to call you Zoli Bashi a long time ago up in Farna." The face joggled something way back in my mind. "Uncle Zoli, he called me. I'm Danny." I suddenly remembered his face, smaller and fearful, looking to me for help. 4 years before, my friend Bootblack and I helped Toth at the orphanage in another town. I felt a pang at realizing Danny was still an orphan, still waiting to be wanted. "Why, sure," I said. "I hardly knew you. You're so big. What are you now, 9?" "Yes, sir." He said nothing more, but just as before, he walked beside me, his chin tucked slightly, asking by his posture to stay with me. I dispatched the older boys to the school lane I knew well. A little way on, I said goodbye to the younger fellows. I felt embarrassed at their ragged collars and their thin pants. A few waved to me, and I, but an older version of them, waved back. At the orphanage upstairs, Kiss Nanny and Greta were making beds. The hall had been swept as far as the room they were in, the brooms resting against the door jamb. The two women lifted the mattress together and snapped the sheet under it, and in the same motion pulled the top of the sheet to the pillow. The wash basins were dry, the pitchers empty. I lifted the towel on the stand, and it was dry as well. "Kiss Nanny," I said, "has everything been going about as usual around here? Last night, today, I mean." She straightened up from thumping a pillow into place. "Pretty much. You always make the beds?" "Sure." She stared at me for a moment, and then went past and took up the sheets and broom. "Let me carry that stuff," I said. That afternoon, when the boys came tearing in from school, I met them at the stairs. I stood 3 steps up, leaning on the rail. They halted at the bottom and milled in the lobby. "Good afternoon, gentlemen." "Gentlemen." A couple of smaller boys answered me. I came down a step. "I'm glad to see you home." Still they said nothing. "I've been just looking around," I said, "seeing how things go around here, and I've noticed a job or two that needs a man. But I haven't the time. I thought I might look over this group here and see if I could find a suitable worker." "What jobs?" one of the tallest boys said. "Well, for starters, splitting wood and carrying water." "Mr. Toff did that," said a boy with wavy black hair. I ignored the rustle among the troops. "And shining shoes?" "Ah," the first boy said. I sat down on the second stair. "Kees Nani does that now, doesn't she? Every night while you sleep." "Well, that's no job for women. They haven't got the arm for it. A man can get a real shine on leather when he wants to." I slid my foot out and leaned back on the third stair. A few eyes went down to my gleaming shoe and back to me. "But," I said, "maybe there's no one here to do it but me." There was no volunteer, but neither were there any deserters. "And," I said, "men have to learn to look after themselves. Kees Nani and Miss Greta won't always be around. What I like is independence, don't you?" I waited. At last Danny spoke up. "I'll do it, sir." A bigger boy said, "You? It'll take a week to learn how." The tallest of them spoke again. "Can't you idiots see what he's doing? He's tricking you into doing his work." I stood up slowly and glowered down on him. "No, boy, I'm trying to trick you into doing your own work. But if you won't be coaxed, there are other methods." By the end of the next week, there was a new order at the Komaram orphanage. Every boy made his own bed and carried his own plate to the sink after meals. The shining of shoes and the splitting of wood were rotated among the privileged older few. Younger boys watched as though from the sidelines of a soccer game and begged for something important to do. "Please, Zoli Bashi," they said, "we'll do a good job." "Well, I don't know," I said. I rubbed the back of my neck. "This sweeping is tricky." "Show us how," they said. I drew my hand across my chin as if in deep thought. "I guess we could try it for a week, but if it starts to look shabby in here, I'll have to take the job back by myself." I didn't have to take the job back. Every night after supper, I read from the Bible. At first, I chose verses from the Proverbs about the value of hard work and obedience. I watched the faces, some smooth with innocence, some already cloudy with bitterness and rebellion. The tallest boy, Gab, had eyes like stones. His chin jutted out in constant defiance of all the world. "Now," I said, closing the Bible, "think we should talk about homework. I haven't seen any being done around here. Surely you all have some." "No," said Gab. "They don't give orphans homework because they don't have homes to work it in." The boys looked to me with wide eyes, expecting perhaps a sermon or punishment for Gab. Gab balanced his chair on his 2 back legs. "Boys," I said, "when your parents died, God gave you many mothers and fathers in their stead. You have Miss Greta, Kees Nani, and Pastor, and Miss Toth, and me. And as your papa, I'm asking you, where is your homework?" Gab's chair slammed down. "You are not my father." "Suit yourself. But where is your homework?" His eyes blazed at me. "Get it, or I go with you to the gymnasium tomorrow." The other boys looked at him cautiously. He finally stood and cast his chair backward and strode out. The others looked again to me, waiting. "From now on," I said, "you will do your homework and show it to me." The eyes went down to the tables and plates. "You have to learn to work. Knowing how to work makes you enjoy your life. Don't you want the pleasure of being able to do many kinds of things?" "Yes," the replies put all together, but made a feeble response. Gab returned and threw the notebook down in front of me so that it spun to a stop just beside my hand. "Very good. Now I'm going to put a note to the teacher here asking him to write the assignment out so that I can check on it." Keesnani smiled over from her chair by the stove and nodded. "And before you do any chores tonight, I want you to see everyone's notebook. And if you don't have a notebook, we'll send a piece of paper to your teacher." I gave Gab his book, looking at him directly. "The rest of you can go," I said. "Bring me your notebooks." They piled out of the kitchen. I had not taken my eyes from Gab. "Gab, the handwriting in this book is terrible. Now I know you can do better. I suspect you are the smartest boy in your class. Why do you make an effort to hide it?" "You think you know all about it, don't you?" "More than you think," I said. "What do you care about my handwriting?" "I care about your handwriting because I care about you. If you have the right heart, you'll have a better hand. Laziness has many witnesses." He shoved away from the wall he had been leaning on, and looking at me as he might at a growling dog, went out. Keesnani said, "You're not as young as you look." I'll stop right there. That was kind of a long section in that one. Let me ask you a few questions about it, just to kind of make sure we're on the same page here, so to speak. Let's go back to page 198 where I started. All right. So, let me see here. What year did this story begin? It says right there on the top of page 198, it begins in 1937. What do you know about this year in relation to World War II? We haven't really studied World War II yet, but World War II has not come yet. This is talking about when the war is over, going on into World War II. World War II, I think, begins in 1941 or in the 40s at some point. What do you think Mrs. Toff means when she says, "I didn't know you, how you've changed"? That's the orphanage, remember, where Zoli had grown up, and now he's coming back. And so that means that Mrs. Toff was there when he was a little boy, and so she remembered him. Look at page 199. There's a picture of the orphanage in Hungary. It looks like it may be, I don't know if it's a picture or a drawing. I can't really tell. So who lives at the orphanage? How many boys? 30 boys. Any girls? Nope. Do the boys have good or bad manners? Bad manners. Why do you think they have bad manners? They seem like they're just being disrespectful of everyone. They don't make their beds. They throw their books down. They're loud. They wrestle and they do all kinds of stuff that they're not seemingly like they're respectful. Why do you think Zoli is still expecting to find a reason for what had just gone on? On page 199, he had seen the boys come in to eat, and he heard all the rustling and stuff, and then they just left all their bowls and stuff. And he said he was still expecting to find a reason for what had just gone on. He doesn't understand why they're being allowed to act the way that they've been acting. Look at page 200. Who takes care of all these boys in the orphanage? Greta and Keesnani, the nanny. That's right. What kind of worker is Zoli? He's a good hard worker, isn't he? He's not afraid of work. He's not afraid of hard work, and he's not lazy. Let's look at page 201. Do you think all the boys made it to breakfast in 15 minutes? Probably, because remember he said if you're not there in 15 minutes, then you miss out. I think probably they did. What does the author compare Zoli and the boys to on page 201? It's on the right-hand side. No, I'm sorry. It's, where'd it go? Yeah, it's on the right-hand side. He says, the walk was not long, but I could see the wisdom of having a sheepdog herd the sheep toward the gymnasium. The author's comparing the boys to the sheep and Zoli to the sheepdog. What is the gymnasium? It was the school. Nowadays we just call it a gym, like where you go play basketball or volleyball or something. But in those days in Hungary, that was actually the name of the school. Look at page 202. Do you think that Zoli really understands what life is like for these boys? I think he does, because remember, he was thrown out of his own home. So he was put away, he didn't lose his parents, but they put him away. How does Zoli try to persuade the boys to change their work habits? He's talking to him about needing a man to do these certain things. So he's trying to persuade them by making them feel big and like they have, manly responsibilities. All right, now what lies ahead for the boys of the orphanage? Do you think they're going to change? Do you think, especially the oldest one, Gab, do you think that he's going to change and actually come to like Zoli? We will find out. All right, I'd like for you to look in your work text on page 83. Now, I'm not going to help you with this page. It's a page that I'm going to grade. Okay, so you're going to have to read the words of the characters from the story, and then you need to write the name of the person that said those things, that said those words, okay? And like I said, I'm going to grade it. There's 7 problems or 7 questions on here. So I'd like for you to finish page 83 for a grade, okay? And that'll be all for today.